President Trump, sir, your message to the people of Ukraine as world leaders gather here today. Russia continues to attack civilians in Kharkiv, killing many.
Is there a just offer for peace on the table?
President Zelensky, are you prepared to keep sending Ukrainian troops to their deaths for another couple years, or are you going to agree to redraw the maps?
Thank you for your question. So, first of all, we live under each day attacks. That today have been a lot of attacks and a lot of wounded people, and the child was dead, small one year and a half. So we need to stop this war, to stop Russia, and we need support American and European partners, and we will do our best for this. So, and I think we show that we are strong people, and we supported the idea of the United States, of personally of President Trump, to stop this war, to make a diplomatic way of finishing this war, and we are ready for trilateral, as President said. This is a good signal about trilateral. I think this is very good. Thank you.
President Zelensky, you look fabulous in that suit.
I said the same thing.
Yeah, you look good.
I said the same thing.
Yeah.
Isn't that nice? That's the one that attacked you last time. See, now he's.
I remember that.
No, my first question for you,
But
President
it was
Zelensky.
in the same suit. You see, I changed. You are not.
Maybe yours is much better. Real quickly, upon peace, God willing we get peace, are you open to holding an election in your country?
Yes, of course. We are open for election, yes. We have to do safety circumstances, and a little bit we need to work in the parliament, because during the war you can't have elections, but we can do security. We need, we need a truth, yes, everywhere, in the battlefield, in the sky, in the sea, to make possible for people to do democratic, open, legal elections.
So you say during the war you can't have elections. So let me just say 3.5 years from now. So you mean if we happen to be in a war with somebody, no more elections? Oh, that's good. I wonder what the fake.
You like this idea? No.
Speaking of news.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kevork Almassian. Thank you very much for tuning in to the 19th episode of Cold War 2.0 with our dear friend Tarik Cyril Amar. This is a special coverage of the aftermath of the Alaska summit, when the Trump administration and Trump himself and his administration have met with the leaders of the EU and Zelensky. Dear Tarik, first of all, how are you doing after the weekend? I hope you're doing well.
I'm fine. How are you, Kevork?
I'm good. I'm following with great interest what's going on in the White House, and especially with the visit of the EU leaders, some of the NATO leaders, Ursula von der Leyen, Friedrich Merz, Meloni, Zelensky. It seems that the White House is crowded with world leaders. Can you please walk us through what we have achieved as the concerned citizens of the world with this meeting after Trump met with Putin? He came back to the United States and he invited Zelensky and other world leaders, basically, to probably tell them what happened during this Alaska meeting. But what has he imposed on the other partners of the United States? Did he impose certain terms? Have we reached into ceasefire agreement? What is happening?
Yeah, so look, I would first say one thing to preface it all, which is that in this process that has obviously gathered speed now after the Alaska meeting, we don't know all too much publicly. There's a lot of speculation. I've been following the speculation as much as I could at various Western, mostly mainstream media. But actually, there's not a lot of certain or firm knowledge, right? And some people have pointed this out before me, but I would like to underline this as well. That's actually a good sign. That's actually a very good sign, because a serious diplomatic process, especially one to end a war such as this, cannot take place in public. That would be entirely impossible. And therefore, that we see that it's to an extent still shielded that it's obscured from public scrutiny at this point, is actually, even if it's frustrating, a good sign. So having said all of this, I think the first thing to note for me about the Washington meeting, at least yesterday on Monday, is that it didn't change anything fundamentally, at least, that happened in Alaska, right? I'm saying this so emphatically because I was reading, among other things, a very silly article today in Political. And that article, for reasons that are unfathomable to me, claimed that the Europeans got Trump back to where he had been before Alaska. The opposite is the case. The opposite is the case. Trump has not changed his position. The position that he reached together with President Putin of Russia at the Alaska summit. He has not changed this on Monday in Washington. What Trump has done is he has been conciliatory. He has been conciliatory both with Zelensky from Ukraine and with this gaggle of European nannies or coaches, whatever they were there actually, that came with him to, I think, protect him from Trump in case Trump gets grumpy, right? The opposite happened. Trump didn't get grumpy. Trump was, especially by his usual standards and considering his temperament, he was courteous, responsible, calm, moderate, and so on and so on. And some people apparently mistake this surface effect, right, which I think Trump has full control of. He wants to send that message for somehow indicating that he's now back on the European side or on Ukraine's side in that sense. That's absolutely not true. There are two very clear criteria where you can read that off.
Yes.
The sanctions are still not being talked about, right? German Chancellor Merz once again tried to talk about pressuring Russia, and it went nowhere with Trump. People can look that up. That part of the meeting was public, and we can see Trump's reaction. The sanctions are still off the table with Trump. And the other thing is that Trump hasn't revised his position taken again in Alaska, that it is better to go for a peace agreement immediately than going first for a ceasefire. And we've talked about this before. The short version, the essential of this, the essence of this issue is the Ukrainians and the Europeans want a ceasefire first because it's advantageous to Ukraine and disadvantageous to Russia to do it this way. And Russia, on the other hand, while it is winning the war on the ground, is saying, we are not interested in that. That's not good for us, which is true. If you want to talk to us, we have to talk about a full settlement, a full peace settlement from the get-go, right? And then
does this also include the security architecture for Eastern Europe, or this only includes Ukraine?
Yes, and there be the security architecture for Eastern Europe. You're raising a very good point. Let me add one more thing. The first part of whatever would come in terms of a security architecture for Eastern Europe as a whole after this war is what usually is discussed under the heading security guarantees for Ukraine, right? And these were very much discussed explicitly in Washington. That we know, right? The Europeans had one big aim, which was to at least get Washington to acknowledge that any final settlement of the war must come with substantial security guarantees for Ukraine from Western countries, right? Now, there again, Trump has actually not budged at all. He has been explicit in an interview today, I think it was on Fox, and he was explicitly asked, do you consider the possibility of putting American boots on the ground? Not in the sense of entering the war, he would never do that, but in the sense of taking part in a so-called peacekeeping mission after the war is over, right? And Trump was absolutely clear. He may change his mind, but for now he was absolutely clear. It's a no. No American troops on the ground. No American troops on the ground. This means that the options that the Europeans want to see for giving the Ukrainians these security guarantees are already limited. Now, we can go back to this topic because it gets really sort of, there are a lot of details in play, but this is definitely something that is now very important. The bigger point you raised, and which I don't want to forget, which is what about the security architecture for Eastern Europe as a whole? This is a very important question. In fact, I would generalize it even further, and I would say, or I would recall, that in late 2021, shortly before the big escalation in February 2022, Russia made exactly that demand, right? When they sent us, the West, the final warning shot. They essentially said, we don't only want to talk about Ukraine, we want to talk about the whole security architecture of Europe. Everything is wrong. We want to have a reset, like a real one, right? I find it very interesting that Russian demand has hardly played a role recently, not to my knowledge, not in Russian media, not in statements by major Russian players like, say, Peskov and Lavrov and Ushakov and Putin himself, of course. This initial demand that the Russians did articulate very clearly just before the major escalation of 22, that we want to discuss everything, right? We want to sort of make a fresh start. I don't hear much of that. And my guess is that Russia has quietly put this very much on the back burner. My guess is that in Moscow as well, smart people, I believe, have come to understand that is such a massive demand, that is so much to do before you get perhaps to an end of the specific conflict in Ukraine, that it's better to at least set that aside for now, right? Especially see it from their perspective, I think. If you are in the Russian position and you see that the Americans are moving toward you, then there are two things happening, right? On one side, the Americans will facilitate, if you're lucky, if everything works well, they will facilitate a solution in Ukraine that is good for you, right? That you can live with. But on the other side, they will also perhaps be ready for a much larger normalization, a détente process, right? So if you have this bigger issue of what do we do with this whole security architecture, you may well say, let's settle the Ukraine thing. And then if everything goes well with the Americans, we can still use that to also work on that other bigger issue, but it will take longer.
Yes. But Tarik, don't you think that the Russians probably have put this issue of the security architecture in Eastern Europe on the shelf for the moment because they haven't reached, let's say, decisive victory in Ukraine yet? So let's solve the Ukraine issue first, and then in the future, this could pop up again. And this worries the European leaders, right? So the European leaders worry that the Americans may withdraw some of their long-range missiles or the tactical nuclear missiles from Europe. That's why we have to accelerate the defense expenditure. So from the European point of view, why I'm trying to push back on this, just to create a discussion, why would the Americans or the Europeans trust Russia in this case if this is going to come at a later stage when they see Russia as a threat against their national security, right? So why would they give up on Ukraine or restructure the security architecture in Eastern Europe if every time they give a compromise to Russia, then the Russians will come one step ahead on the chessboard?
Well, there's a fundamental difference between politics and war, right? And the Europeans don't want to understand that difference, interestingly enough. They always blame the Russians for getting the two mixed up, but I think conceptually the Europeans are doing that. There doesn't have to be any trust, as far as I'm concerned, and I think people who think seriously about foreign policy know that trust is one of the least important factors. Yes, it can play a role. It can make certain things easier. It can catalyze certain things under certain circumstances. I'm not saying trust is insubstantial, but I am saying that serious powers have to consider, this is a classic of realist thinking, and I think the realists are right about here. They don't have to consider the intentions of the other, which is a question of trust. They have to consider the capabilities of the other. Right? What could the other potentially do to me? And therefore, trust is a very secondary, tertiary factor anyhow. And keep in mind, the Russians have no reason to trust the West either. So this cuts both ways. And I don't mean this in a moralizing tit-for-tat way. I just mean it's almost technical, right? The challenge of finding a compromise by negotiations in a situation like this is precisely that you can't start with trust. If you're very lucky, right, everything goes very well, you solve a lot of problems together, maybe at the end you get a little bit of trust, right, as a side effect. But you can't start with trust because the trust isn't there, right? It can't be there. Only idiots would go into this guided by trust, right? So about your more specific question, how can the Europeans be certain that, you know, the Russians wouldn't attack them, essentially, right? There are, of course, ways of assessing the probability of such an event, right? One is that in spite of what Western media are constantly telling people in the West, the Russians have actually not made any serious statements about wanting to attack NATO countries, wanting to attack Finland, the Baltics, Poland, Germany, France, you name it, right? They haven't actually. They're staying well away from that. In fact, you could read the course of this war in Ukraine to yield exactly the opposite in terms of evidence. Look, it is really true. This is not a partisan statement. This is an empirical observation that the West has massively supported Ukraine. The West has de facto become what used to be called a sort of co-belligerent with Ukraine, right? I would be tempted to say the West has given them everything in terms of money, intelligence, and arms, except soldiers. But even that wouldn't be true, because in reality, and the Russians know this very well, there have been Western soldiers fighting against them. There have been special forces, black ops, mercenaries. And of course, the way that you can send some of your official military into a situation like this is you release them from your official armed forces and they become mercenaries. Well, all of this has been going on. Everybody knows this. The Russians know it. The West knows it, right? Among serious people, we know this stuff.
Yes.
So the Russians have been in a situation where if they wanted to find a reason to strike at the West, in the West, they could have done it many times over. The Russians had all the reasons it took to say, oh, we're going to take out a base in Poland now. We've had it. We know that these mercenaries are being trained there. We know this is where the Polish people who come here and fight, literally people fighting against the Russians, are going through that base. That's part of taking part in this war against us. We have every right to attack. And if NATO doesn't like it, well, let's see what happens, right?
Yes.
They could have done this many times. It is true that they have warned us again and again, right, not to go too far, including some nuclear, very vague nuclear hints. But the bigger story, which Western media don't want to tell you, the much bigger story is the enormous restraint. We, the West, have thrown at them everything except absolute direct, full-scale open participation in the war. Everything else we've done.
Yes.
And the Russians have not attacked us directly. Oops, right? What does it tell us? So if the Europeans were sensible, right, there's also obviously an old policy of how you deal with this sort of uncertainty. You run what used to be called a dual track policy, which is very, very old, right? Which is due diligence and security. On one side, you talk to the other, who you can't quite trust, but maybe you can trade with them as well. You can talk to them. You can have actually decent relationships with them, but you never trust them. So on one side, you talk, you get the advantages of the talk, and on the other side, you maintain a decent military establishment that in an emergency, if the other betrays you and actually attacks you, you can fall back on. That's not impossible to do. What is so strange about the Europeans is that they have become phobic about one side of this very simple balance. They're basically saying we want to have nothing to do with talking to the Russians under any circumstances. All we want is arm against them, which is a very odd policy, right?
Yeah, and even by the diplomats, and when the diplomats supposed to at least have a different rhetoric or different literature in this case, it really sounds weird to me to listen to foreign ministers basically talking more about war than peace and diplomacy. I mean, they have defense ministers and chief of staff and generals to speak about war as much as they want. But
and that's their job. That's good. That's fine. But Kevork, if I may add one very concrete thing, because I should mention that. If the Europeans are concerned about their own security vis-a-vis Russia, right? Let's just take that as a given. Let's be kind and say, okay, that's what they are busy with. They could see in a settlement in Ukraine a great chance. Because look, even if the Russians are pushing, or even if they should continue to push politically for their ideas about security architecture in Europe, there's nothing that keeps the Europeans from negotiating back politically. And one of the things that both sides could end up with is that neither gets what they want. For instance, the Russians may have to live with the fact that the NATO enlargements that happened during this war will stay, right? The Russians could come and say, we really hate that thing that Finland is in NATO now, for instance, or Sweden. And say, well, that has to be revised. But the Russians might have to just live with that. That's it. But what we could achieve altogether is arms control. Also another classic of foreign policy. Good old arms control. If the conflict in Ukraine ends with a settlement, it opens the way for serious talk about arms control at a regional level and at a global level. And we really, really need that, by the way.
Yes. Before we move on with this discussion, I just want to answer to our moderator. When is the Q&A? The Q&A. So what I did today is I just found something on YouTube says, like it's like a challenge for those who are watching this stream. Like if this channel receives 10 super chats today, then you could do like a Q&A for your followers. So I could do a Q&A tomorrow, after tomorrow, guys. So either Wednesday or Thursday. 1.5 hours for you if this stream receives 10 super chats. I think it already received 2. So I would definitely answer to your question, Red Access, about the axis of resistance and joining the war against Israel after October 7, whether that was a trap for them or not, when the Q&A happens. And I also saved a few questions for our dear friend Tarik for later. But first, there is something now that is being discussed, Tarik, and this is Article 5 like guarantees. And this is what Ursula von der Leyen has mentioned. I would like to bring the attention of our viewers of this issue, which is important. Let's take a look first what she said.
Ursula, maybe on behalf of the Commission, you could say a couple of words.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a very important moment. Indeed, we are here, Europeans, as friends and allies. We had a fantastic NATO summit together as the 2 largest and biggest economies in the world. We had the largest trade deal ever agreed. And now we are here to work together with you on a just and lasting peace for Ukraine. Stop the killing. This is really our common interest, stop the killing. And indeed, it's very good to hear that we're working on the security guarantees, Article 5 lies security guarantees, so important. But I want to thank you also that you mentioned the thousands of Ukrainian children that have been abducted. And as a mother and grandmother, every single child has to go back to its family. This should be one of our main priorities also in these negotiations, to make sure that the children come back to Ukraine, to their families.
Thank you.
So what is the Article 5 like security guarantees, Tarik? And what is the issue of the abducted children from Ukraine to Russia?
Yeah, okay. So let me say 2 very quick things, right? Ursula von der Leyen is, of course, a atrocious hypocrite. And I don't say this ironically. I say this very seriously. She's a horrible liar. It is, to me, it is stunning to see her even mention the trade deal as a success. The success of the trade deal that she negotiated with Trump consisted of giving the Americans everything and sacrificing the interests of Europe. That was the success of that. And the second thing I would mention about her, it is shameless of her to even mention children. Because Ursula von der Leyen, I consider her an accomplice in the genocide in Palestine. And I think that's how she will be seen by history. And in this genocide, children are massacred every day from the beginning till now in the most cruel, abject form by Ursula von der Leyen's Israeli allies. So she has no business to talk about children and do the mother-grandmother spiel.
Yeah.
But having said that about the snake, I would say about the Article 5 first. So in the NATO treaty, after all, it's a North Atlantic Treaty Organization, right? In the NATO treaty that sets the groundwork for this monster, right? Article 5 is often considered, and I think rightly so, the founding stone, the core. Because Article 5, in essence, says an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us, right? So that's the piece of the NATO treaty that says, if you attack, say, nowadays, Poland, you're going to have to deal with Germany, Britain, the US, France, all of us, right? Now, here's the complication that many people don't understand. Article 5, if you read it attentively, is not a hair trigger. It's not as if an outside power, any outside power, outside NATO, were to attack a NATO member militarily, then all other NATO members would immediately jump up and start fighting against that outside power. That's actually not the content of Article 5. That's what a lot of people think, and I think NATO propaganda has left them with that false impression very deliberately. What the article essentially says is everybody's concerned and must do something. It's pretty strong, but it's not a hair trigger. It's not. So that's the first thing to mention. So now the idea of Article 5, like security guarantees for Ukraine, right? I think this goes back actually to the Italians. And I think Meloni was actually taking credit for it yesterday. It's an older idea. And the idea is very simple. We now understand that the Russians have forced us to finally give up on the idiotic idea, which we have pursued officially since 2008, of admitting Ukraine to NATO. The Russians have won. Against all our worst efforts, the Russians are compelling us, the West, this is what's happening here, to understand that we cannot have what we said we wanted. We cannot keep the door to NATO open for Ukraine. This is it. But then, this is the new idea. We can make some other treaties with Ukraine outside NATO. They'll never be NATO. We make some other treaties, and in these other treaties, we use language very similar to that of the famous Article 5 of the NATO treaty, right? So you get sort of almost NATO, but not NATO or something. It's a very weird construction. Now, this has come up in this context. The idea is older. I really think it goes back to the Italians a few months, half a year or something ago. It came up in the context of the Alaska and Washington meetings because between the two meetings, after Alaska, before Washington, Steve Witkoff, Trump's sort of personal diplomat, gave an interview. And in that interview, I forgot to whom, somewhere in the US, he said, oh, yeah, and by the way, the Russians have agreed we can give Ukraine Article 5-like guarantees, just not in NATO, right? So here's what I think about this. And the first time I read this, I found this very strange. I am absolutely convinced if there's one thing the Russians will not agree to, is then to give Ukraine the same as NATO membership, but under another name. If people think that, forget it. I know it sounds like this, but that's not going to happen. Point number one. And I think Trump knows this. And I think a lot of the Europeans also know this. But of course, in politics, talking about this in this grandiloquent way, like, oh, we're going to do the same thing for them just without the label, right, is also a way of reassuring Western publics, of staying consistent with Western promises and propaganda as much as they still can, of giving Zelensky something to sell at home, right, through his extremely controlled media to these poor people who don't have access to decent information in this country. So in a sense, it's probably partly information warfare to talk this way. But I'm absolutely convinced this is something I will bet on. I usually don't predict, but this I will predict. One thing that's not going to happen is that the Russians suddenly say, oh, you can give them the same stuff that we have been fighting against for years at enormous cost, just
Under different
don't
umbrella.
call it officially NATO. That's
No.
not going to happen. Whatever this means, and I don't know what it means, that's not going to happen. And the third point I want to make is, consider what I pointed out at the beginning. Article 5 isn't quite as strong itself as many people think, right? So there's another wrinkle here. Even if you gave Ukraine similar language, it is very open to a very soft interpretation as well, if you want to. A lot of people don't know this about NATO, but it's true, right? So this is a thing where I know what the Russians won't allow. Beyond that, I'm not sure what this is about.
What about the letter of Melania Trump and Graham talking about designating Russia a terrorist state? Is this a plan B? What is this letter about? And what is Lindsey Graham talking about disintegrating Russia or designating it as a terrorist state?
Yeah, you mean Melania's letter to that Trump handed on for Putin, right? So the letter is a very, I find it hard to summarize it. In my view, it's a very general sort of plea to think of the interests and the needs and the safety of children. But of course, if you make this plea, and I'm not being ironic here, of course not, but if you make this plea in this situation, of course, the reference is in particular to children in Ukraine that are in the war zone. It's also in the background, of course, the Ukrainian accusation, which, by the way, is untrue, that the Russians have systematically, as it were, stolen children on a large scale, right? We have to talk about that too. That's actually not true. It really isn't a fact. These things are in there, right? I see the letter by Melania actually very much as a compromise within the couple Trump, to be very honest. I feel it's that Melania Trump, and I'm not criticizing her. Why would I? She may be very sincere in her intentions here, and that's fine. That she felt very strongly about this issue of the children. Trump, on the other hand, really wants to build a relationship with Putin and Russia. And in the end, what he could do for her is hand on the letter. And Putin, of course, would be an idiot if he didn't accept the letter graciously, which he should, for many reasons, out of politeness, out of political wisdom, and so on and so on. I think that's a bit the story of this letter. Now, the larger issue, once again, let me say, and this I have to say about the Trumps as well, both her and him, anybody who pretends to care about children but does not care about what Israel is doing to Palestinian children for over 2 years now, I can't take that very seriously. Or almost 2 years now. I can't take that very seriously, as with Ursula von der Leyen. If you are, as you should be as a human being, especially concerned with the suffering of children, the focus of your attention cannot be on Russia. It just doesn't make sense. It's not because I want to prefer the Russians. The biggest issue in the world, and we have statistics on this, in terms of murdering children and making them suffer abysmally, is the Israeli genociders. That's it.
I have zero doubt, Tarik, about the hypocrisy of these politicians, but I'm still struggling to understand. They're talking about tens of thousands of children abducted by Russia. What is the issue? How would Russia take children from war zone and take it to Russia? I would like to know.
So this is an issue. I wrote an article about, I don't know, half a year ago. Again, it's a bit fuzzy, but I did once write about this. And it's a bit long, but let me explain the background. For the side of Ukraine and for those in the West who wanted to support Ukraine at all costs and by all means, there once was, it's now no longer so important, a specific information war political strategy. And that strategy was to somehow claim that Russia is not only waging a war, we all know that. I know this, you know this. Normal people understand that. But that Russia is committing a genocide. It's hard to imagine that now, right? Isn't it? Because we know who's actually committing a genocide, and it looks totally different. It's the Israelis in Gaza. What Russia is doing is not genocide, and very seriously not. That just doesn't make sense. But there was a strategy, a Western Ukrainian information war strategy to try to utilize the notion of genocide. So genocide is actually a pretty complex crime. And as genocide experts point out, in theory, very hypothetically, the crime is constructed in such a way that you could conceivably commit a genocide without ever directly killing an individual. What that would mean is you would, for instance, make it impossible for a people to reproduce. You wouldn't murder any of the existing individuals in the people, but you would make it totally impossible for them to reproduce. And that would actually count as a genocide, because genocide aims ultimately at exactly what the word says, killing a people, murdering a whole people, or trying to murder a whole people, right? You can commit the crime even with partial results.
Yes.
Now, to make that stick, they homed in on the children. What had happened mostly was that the Russians had evacuated children from the war zone, right? That's actually the factual underpinning here. And that was then reinterpreted in a very flimsy way. There was an institute at Yale that played a very unpleasant role there, was reinterpreted in such a way as to construct a charge that what they were really doing was to steal the children to Russianize them, right? To take them away from the Ukrainian people, deprive them of the Ukrainian identity, make them Russian. And if you do that, that is actually, yes, that's within the aura of genocide, right? The problem is not the problem. The fact is the Russians didn't do that. It is true that they took children. Mostly, however, it seems really to evacuate them from a war zone. It is true that there have been some adoptions that were dubious, right? It is true that some of the children weren't ideally traceable. But it is also true, and the Russians can prove that on the whole, when Ukrainians have turned to them and said, look, I am, say, the aunt of that child, I am the next kin, I can prove this, the Russians have turned the children over, which is what you should do in a situation like that, right? Or if it's the parents themselves or the grandparents, the Russians can show that they have done this systematically. Then there's the issue of scale. I don't know how people still operate with these insane numbers. In the Istanbul negotiations directly between Ukrainian and Russian teams that have been going on again, this issue was also raised. And the Russians essentially said to the Ukrainians, look, if your concern is these children that you're missing, give us a list. You're saying there are 20,000, 40,000, 10,000, whatever. Give us a list. We will work through the list. And the Ukrainians produced a list, and it had, I can't remember the exact number, but it had between 300 and 400 names on it.
Wow.
300.
That's a big difference.
That's an enormous difference. And look, it's possible that even the list isn't complete. It's possible that the absolute number is higher. But what this difference tells me immediately, and I think that's a very reasonable conclusion, is that these extremely high numbers were produced for propaganda purposes. Exactly as the faulty interpretation, the erroneous interpretation that all of this was done as a conscious strategy to de-Ukrainianize a very large number of actually Ukrainian children.
Yep.
I'm convinced that almost nothing of that case remains, and most of it will go away. Whatever is still left will go away once we look back in history. This was mostly information warfare from the West and Ukraine. But of course, it also played a role, one last thing, in the fact that Putin became someone under a search warrant from the International Criminal Court. right? And we've heard this with the Alaska summit again. How can he even travel? They would have to arrest him. No, for one thing, the Americans actually really don't have to arrest him because they haven't signed up to the statute of that court, right? That's one thing. But the other thing is, what are you even talking about, people? They're clapping for Netanyahu. Excuse me? What?
I mean, there is no self-reflection at all. Our friend Che says that this abduction of Ukrainian children by Russia is one of the most pernicious and false lies peddled by Kiev. Kiev says that Russia kidnapped 20,000 Ukrainian kids. The BBC says 30,000. Meanwhile, researchers from Yale in the US says it is 8,400. And this is where it gets almost embarrassingly ridiculous. At the peace negotiation in Istanbul in 2025, Ukraine handed over a list of 339 children allegedly abducted by Russia.
Yes.
So there is a huge contrast. I mean, one children is a lot, but the journalist here, Chase, says it's complete fraud. Russia moved civilians out of harm's way during the war, while Ukraine terrorized them, used them as human shields, etc. So there is a big contrast. It seems that definitely there is an element of atrocity propaganda, the least to say, in this case. In this case, in order to bring this case into more a genocide categorization, as you mentioned. Just before we move to the last part of our today's discussion, guys, as you can see on the screen, I'm scrolling a special offer from our dear friend Tarik. If you subscribe to Tarik's Substack today and tomorrow, you can get 20% off on new annual subscriptions. The link is already scrolling on the screen, and the link is already attached in the description below, so you don't have to search for it. The next one is going to be about Friedrich Merz. I'm sure that you're very excited about that. And Friedrich Merz, he made a comment during this conversation with Trump. Let's listen first to him.
Mr. Chancellor from Germany, a very great leader.
Mr. President, dear Donald, many thanks for having us today. I think this is extremely helpful that we are meeting and hearing that the two of you are having such a good meeting today here in Washington. The next steps ahead are the more complicated ones now. The path is open. You opened it last Friday, but now the way is open for complicated negotiations. And to be honest, we all would like to see a ceasefire, the latest from the next on. I can't imagine that the next meeting would take place without a ceasefire. So let's work on that, and let's try to put pressure on Russia, because the credibility of these efforts we are undertaking today.
Meloni is rolling her eyes.
I feel her. I so feel her.
Negotiations from next step on. So I would like to emphasize this aspect and would like to see a ceasefire from the next.
You know, she's Italian, so when she isn't moving her hands, she thinks nobody can guess anything.
We're going to let.
It's literally in her eyes.
It's in her eyes.
It's in her eyes. But Tarik, I will go one step further. Our friend today, a mutual friend, he shared an article on X, and I got the translation of this article. It comes from stern.de, and this article says the right Merz at the right moment. Wait. In terms of foreign policy, Friedrich Merz proves that he can be chancellor. His appearance in Washington was the next proof of this, but now the man has to deliver domestically. Friedrich Merz, who performs in Germany, is somehow who likes to be at the forefront, who lectures, and which often misses the right tone. Friedrich Merz, who was on Monday evening in Washington, appeared. I think the translation here is completely ruined by the auto translation. However, one of the political scientists in Germany, his name is Herfried Münkler, said that this was a Helmut Kohl moment for Friedrich Merz, and just like the German chancellor in 1989, he could grab a corner of the clock of history. So
Okay, first of all, right, the reference for that is Bismarck, right?
Mm-hmm.
The famous quote in German history about how the good statesman has to listen to the steps of God as he walks through world history. This is what Bismarck actually wrote.
Mm-hmm.
And when he listens attentively enough, of course, Bismarck was only thinking about men. I mean, Bismarck,
Mhm.
right? Prussian Juncker. Then he may be able to seize, the hem of the cloak of God while he's walking past. So he seizes the opportunity. That is a Bismarck quote. This is not Kohl. Kohl is, Kohl, whatever, Kohl was fine, but not Bismarck. And then the comparison that Herfried makes here to flatter Merz. I mean, it's indecent.
I'm trying not to laugh.
He's
I'm
an
seriously
older
trying not to laugh.
gentleman. He's a professor. I mean, he's behaving like, I don't know, is he sucking up to the teacher? I mean, what is this? The comparison he makes is historically insane. What Kohl did, and he made many mistakes while he was doing it, but I'm ready to say about Kohl that he also was confronted with a very complicated task, right? So let's be fair to Kohl. But what Kohl did during German unification or reunification or the annexation of the GDR, whatever you want to call it, yes, that was reacting to an almost unique historical opportunity. And even I would say, although I have a lot of trouble with how he did so, at least he didn't totally mess it up. Right? He could have done even worse, right? But they didn't do well. Don't get me wrong. So there's nothing comparable here in this Washington talking to, that happened there. I mean, now today we have official pictures released by the White House, and they show Merz and others really sitting like pupils in front of the desk of head teacher Trump. Right, that was in the Oval Office, in front of his desk there. Then later they said, I think in the East Room, that's the scene that you showed us a clip from, where Merz was given an opportunity by Trump. Excuse me, I saw this too, who had this all very much under control to say a few words. Right, that's what happened here, and Merz played his role. And the one thing that stuck out a tiny little bit is that Merz dared mention the ceasefire again. And we know that Trump doesn't want to hear that word anymore, because Trump is now, I think correctly, and I hope he stays there, on Putin's side in going for a peace agreement directly without asking for this unnecessary and actually very obstructive ceasefire condition. Now, Merz, as you heard, said that he cannot imagine that the next major meeting, probably maybe between Zelensky and Putin, or between the trilateral between Trump, Zelensky, Putin, that next major meeting would take place without a ceasefire. To that, one has to answer, Friedrich, nobody cares what you can imagine. That is completely irrelevant here. You are not the guy whose imagination sets the boundaries for the process. That guy is the American president, and then there's a guy in Moscow. Those two, their imaginations matter. Yours doesn't. So this is theater. And what you've just read to me by Münkler, who used to be a decently impressive political scientist, but apparently he's selling out now. But what you read to me by Münkler and what you read to me from Stern is, unfortunately to me, further evidence of how rotten public discussion in Germany now is. We have, among other things, we have this horrendous Russophobia. We have this neo-McCarthyite atmosphere where it's not that you can't criticize. It's that you are completely forbidden from even trying to ever understand the Russians. That's already too much now. No, we have something else, which is we have this new pandering. In German, I will use this for once because I know you know German well too. It's the Obrigkeitsstaat, the state of the authorities we look up to. So even if Merz actually doesn't do anything, and certainly nothing impressive, we pretend that he's grasping the hem of the mantle of history, like Kohl, or implicitly like Bismarck. Excuse me?
Tarik, since you mentioned about the how the mainstream press in Germany has sank basically into the mud. You know, like the public discussion has become really ridiculous about geopolitical issues. The least to say. I want to tell you a personal story happened. As you may know, last week I undergone a surgery, but before that, 2 weeks before that, you go to do all the tests necessary to so they check if you're ready for surgery. And during one of the interviews I had there with the doctor, he's a German doctor. So he asked me, he said, "Oh, your name is, what is this name? Like you're Syrian, but your name is not in Arabic." And I told him the history, you know, what an Armenian does. He goes all the way in history and tells the history. And after that,
he was asking for it.
He was asking for it. And since the discussion became politicized, he started talking about mainstream media. What we're doing tests, medical tests, and he's talking about how the mainstream media has become their approach is so absurd, and they're not telling the entire truth. And so I got encouraged and told him, yeah, like I'm also a journalist. And he said, I don't want to know which outlet you work for, but I believe that most of the mainstream press in Germany have become really low level. And I said, that's why I don't work in the mainstream press. I have my own platform. I own this platform called Syriana Analysis. And he was so excited. Please show me on YouTube your podcast. I want to follow you. And he subscribed it while we were doing tests. So if he's watching us now, greetings to you, our new friend. Tarik, I will show last video. And this is a warning to YouTube and warning to everyone watching this video. This is a fun. This is a joke. This is the voiceover is AI, basically.
I think I've seen it. Yeah.
Or it is done by someone else. So this is a voiceover. This is not real, okay? And we're not endorsing the words in this video. We're just adding some humor, just little bit of humor in this hard geopolitical issues. So that's disclaimer has to be clear for everyone.
Okay, let's see who arrives now. This guy, they say he's the president of Finland, looking like the captain of a cruise ship. We need to get him a captain's hat later on. Okay. Okay, these Europeans all look like accountants. Yes, sir. I come to do your taxes. Okay, thank you, sir. The British Prime Minister, they say this guy is gay. I don't know if that's true or not. I just think he's a dork. Hey, this guy is definitely gay, and his wife is a man, and she beats him. Well, poor guy. Georgia Maloney. I love her. I told her and Elon that if they ever have a kid, they better name him Iloni Maloney. Ursula. I like that she calls me daddy. They all should when you think about it. Good day. Just daddy. Yes, thank you very much.
So this is a voiceover, guys. This is not real. I just said it's not real, and somebody is asking, is this Trump talking? It's not real. It is not real, and we're not endorsing this. This is just for fun at the end of this conversation with our dear friend.
Look, I mean, here's the one thing I have to say about this. It's cruel. It's tasteless. It's politically incorrect. It's also very funny. And what's so terrible about Europe is that in a way they actually deserve it. I'm sorry.
The one that I love the most is Iloni Miloni, because this is the one that in Armenian, for example, when you want to tell someone, like you're on a phone call, and I'm talking to my brother, and I say, are you going to the grocery? Yes, I'm going to the grocery. Can you bring me with you yogurt and mugurt? Like when you say yogurt or chips, mips, for example. Chips, you know what's the chips? And if you say mips, you know, the cola and the rest of issues that are related to chips. And I think whoever made this fun video probably is an Armenian.
Oh, man, maybe we have a trace. Maybe it's an Armenian.
Yeah. By the way, before we end up this discussion, guys, I want to show you something. I just received today this book, Creative Chaos. This is by our dear friend, William van Wagenen. And he sent me a copy of his book, which just dropped in the market 2 weeks ago or 10 days ago. It is available on Amazon. Every time people come on this channel and ask me, I want to learn more about the Syrian war. I want to know more about the role of the secret services in Syria, and especially the role of the CIA in instigating and engineering this war. This is your go-to book if you want to learn about the creative chaos inside the CIA's covert war to topple the Syrian government by William van Wagenen. And I'm very proud. This is the first time something like this happens, that the foreword, I'm not sure if this is going to be clear, the foreword is written of the book is written by me. And at the end of the book, he gives some thanks, let's say, and gratitude for the people that he learned in the past decade. Again, my name is mentioned there. This is a big honor for me. I'm very humbled by this gift by William. Those who want to buy the book, guys, it's in the description below. You can buy it from the US or from Europe. The links are there. I will myself read this book on my vacation next month, and we will have William on this show to go through every chapter of this book. Dear friend Tarik, do you have anything else to add to this very insightful conversation, which we ended up with a little bit of flavor and laughter?
No, for today, no last words.
By the way, I will do live streaming for sure during this week, probably Thursday, to do Q&A. I will also answer to your question, dear friend, your opinion about Anna Kasparian of the Young Turks channel. I have had lots of criticism against her in the past because of her position on the Syrian war and pushing for the regime change. But she came recently to Tucker Carlson's show, and she said that she has made mistakes. She misunderstood a few conflicts in the past, and she's ready to accept that she made mistakes. I'm not like want an apology from her or anything, but I feel people who come and say I was wrong about something, I respect these people even more, even if it's, yeah.
Am I mistaken? I saw only part of that interview. I found it very interesting, and then something happened. Didn't she also take a very clear position against Zionism and Israel on this occasion?
Yes, she did.
Yeah.
She did.
Yeah.
She shined again after some time of being on the woke side and being more playing neoliberal. Regime changes light version, but now she is very fierce, let's say, defender of the Palestine cause. And I hope that one day, if she's listening or if someone knows her, she would host me. Let's have a chat and debate about the Syrian war, because unfortunately what the Young Turks did, the channel of YouTube channel Young Turks was very destructive, let's say, for at least the public approach, how they discuss this issue from a human rights perspective and not from a geopolitical perspective, and this led into the crumbling of Syria and hence also a huge blow to Palestine itself as well. I want to draw these parallels to them if they allow me or give me the opportunity for that. But until then, we want to thank our dear friend Tarik for joining to our special edition of Cold War 2.0, and also thank you so much our dear friend Red Access for moderating this chat always amazingly and professionally, and you're creating the environment for everyone to come and watch and listen and participate in the chat today. I told Tarik 30% of the views on Syriana Analysis are over 65 years old, and over 60% of the views are 45 years and above. So people also want to come even from the, let's say, more matured, probably I would assume, politically matured people want to come and probably express their opinions without being harassed or trolled by some people. So I will see you tomorrow, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're liking this show, thumbs up, like before leaving, subscribe to this YouTube channel, and if you want to support the independent work I'm doing, you can become a patron. The link is scrolling on the screen, and if you don't like to use Patreon, there are different other means in the description below. So peace be upon you, upon your families. Salam.
Bye-bye.